Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. Welcome to how to get a free backup generator. Before we start, there's a couple of housekeeping rules. First is please use the chat box to send us questions. We love questions. Please send questions throughout. Don't wait till the end, but please use the chat box, not the Q&A box. Be aware that everyone can see your question or comment, so in a sense, do be kind. We will be recording this webinar, so therefore we have muted everybody. So again, the chat box is super important. This is a 30-minute webinar, and we're going to move quite quickly. So first thing is I want to call out to our co-sponsors. Two of them, Cummins and Hitachi, are on with me today to provide, I call it, expert advice and inputs. That's John Rodriguez from Cummins and Tom Waters from Hitachi. We're also sponsored by PenCat, Critical Power Systems, been a partner of ours for a long time. Nobody better, and not only in backup generators, but making sure you've got clean, quality power. RPG Energy Group's been a partner of ours for a long time. I've done a number of projects together. And Energy Storage Development Partners, probably the best battery guys in the business. So let's talk real quickly is what does Exergy do and what is this webinar really all about? So Exergy is a simple, easy to use, one-stop shop for companies and municipalities that want to be green, that want to be resilient and save money. We'll make you 100% green. We'll make you 100% resilient. We'll save you money, usually 10 to 15% on your energy spend. We take care of all of it. Simple, just sign up for it. But what we wanted to do in this series of seminars is essentially this is for the do-it-yourself people. People have come to us and said, we'd really like to understand how do you get green, resilient, and how do you save money? So we put together a seminar series. It's 8 webinars. The first one was last week, which was an overview, the 3 sections, green, resiliency, and money saving. The next 7, including today's, is a deeper dive into how we do it if you want to do it yourself, right? So today, again, it's a do-it-yourself educational experience. We're going to take this into 3 parts. The first one is, how do you make money with a generator? The second one is, what type of generator do you need, and I'll put in quotes behind that, to make money? And how do you finance the generator? So let's begin. But I got to be completely candid and honest. John, sort of calling on you, I am pretty sure that you're not giving away free backup generators and that the attendees here are not going to get essentially a discount coupon for 100%. Free in this context does not mean that somebody's going to give you a free generator. What it does mean is if you use the generator intelligently, you can make a profit, and we will teach you how to do that and how to finance it with no money down. So it's totally free from the perspective of you actually make money and it doesn't cost you anything out of pocket. Now, I'm not going to preach about insurance. What I mean by insurance here is downtime can be really expensive. And many times when you're considering a backup generator, you're looking at it and saying, you know, gee, when we go down, how much does it really cost us? How often do we go down and everything else? And many times what we see is a lot of backup generators don't get installed or don't get justified because it's kind of on the bubble there. Do we really need it? Have we been down enough, etc.? So downtime can be extremely expensive, but we're not going to use downtime expense as a justification for the free backup as part of the cost savings, right? A free backup generator here is simply using it intelligently in order to make money. However, we would be remiss if we didn't remind you about what downtime costs are. And I'm not going to go over this in much detail. Everybody has access to this presentation. There's some other charts in here that give you some indications. But for a large manufacturer, the downtime, and I'm looking at this, it could be as much as $50,000 per hour, or $350,000 for 16 hours. Now we can break that down into sort of different classes and sizes. So large and commercial and industrial folks, small commercial and industrial, and residential. So many times people think of backup generators from a residential perspective. Hey, you're down for 16 hours, you know, the value of that backup generator is like $32. But if you are a large industrial or medium and large size industrial, that could be $165,000 to $300,000. So our focus here is on those commercial, industrial, and municipalities that can't afford to go down. And lastly, just breaking it down a little bit more, and again, this is just for your reference of where are the biggest hits. So you can think of it as you see here, construction, you're building something and things like that, and the power goes down, everybody's idle, all the equipment's idle, and the lost time is amazing. Manufacturing, again, extremely expensive. So now, not justifying it on downtime, that's gravy on this. We're going to teach you how to make money with a backup generator. So to do that, there are 4 things that you need to know or learn. They are index pricing, peak load contribution, peak shaving, and demand response. Each of these has a fairly significant financial impact or value to you. The first one is index pricing. Now, almost everybody out there has a commercial and industrial tariff. And in that tariff, you're paying usually a fixed rate per kilowatt hour. And that's great because it's very predictable. If your load's predictable, you know what it's going to cost you, et cetera, et cetera. The reality is that the electricity markets are very, very volatile, and the pricing jumps around a lot. So somebody has to take that price risk, and somebody has to pay for it. So the person that's taking the price risk are the people that are supplying you the electricity when you sign that tariff, but the people who are paying for that price risk is you, because you're paying a higher price than what is really out there in the market, so that the provider of your electricity is willing to take the price risk. If we simply just took you off of the standard tariff and put you on wholesale, and that's what's called an indexed product. Basically, you're buying wholesale rather than retail. You would save about 20% on your electricity spend. 20% by just going from essentially retail to wholesale. So why don't companies do this? And the reason is twofold. Number one is we're a company, and companies need predictability. We've got budgets, we've got shareholders, we've got quarterly reports. We want to make sure we know what our costs are going to be. And therefore, we tend to be willing to pay extra for that certainty. Well, by having a backup generator, you can get that certainty at the same time as enjoying lower prices. So the 4 graphs here, these are 4 of the electricity markets in the United States. That's PJM is Mid-Atlantic states, New England, ERCOT is Texas, and Casio here is California. These prices over the year. So you see the red line would be if you were with it as an Exergy customer, right? Would you be paying? But you'll notice that the average is really quite low, but the volatility is really high. So again, what we're willing to do, or I say most companies are willing to pay more than they really have to in order to protect themselves. But now let's think about this. If you have a backup generator, in the vast, vast majority of cases, your self-generation cost, now that's the generator, the financing of the generator, the O&M, the operations maintenance of it, and the fuel. For most customers, that self-generation cost is slightly less than what you're paying in your tariff today. And what you're paying in that tariff today is what's protecting you from these very high swings. Well, now you're able to protect yourself because you have a generator. If the price swings high, you just don't buy. You turn on your generator and you self-generate. So if we take an example, Texas, the pricing varies from several tens of cents negative, literally negative prices. When wind is, there's not a lot of load and there's lots of wind, they literally pay you to take the power, to as much as $9 a kilowatt hour. $9 a kilowatt hour. Your self-generation cost is probably only 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, that might not be enough to justify having a backup generator or just running off grid the whole time. But what you do by going on the index is you've really closed the variability. You've essentially, in financial terms, made it a collar. So you enjoy all of the downside, but you essentially eliminate the upside risk because you can always self-generate. So rule number one, you want to buy wholesale, use your generator to protect you from the high price swings. Item number two to learn, and this one isn't complex, but I have to say this is kind of bizarre. It's called the peak load contribution. The cost of transmission and generation infrastructures, that's wires, poles, substations, capacity payments, and all that, somebody's got to pay for it, and of course it's us, right? So how do they allocate that? So it's allocated to you based on how much load you have on the grid during a small number of peak hours during the previous year. Now I want to reiterate that. What you pay this year depends upon what you did last year during a few peak hours. Let me try and draw sort of a metaphor here. It's a little bit like a toll booth, right? When you go through the toll booth, you have to pay for using the grid. But the toll that you pay is dependent upon how big a car you had on the road at some point, some hour last year. So if you were driving your Mini, you'd get a low peak load contribution. If you're driving a semi or you're driving your pickup truck, you're going to get a higher one. The thing that is so bizarre about this, and that's why it's called peak load contribution, how much are you contributing to the peak load? You got to pay your fair share, is that it's done on such a few number of hours. So again, same group here, PJM, which is Mid-Atlantic states. There are 5 hours of which they determine what your load was compared to the grid's load, and that's how you're going to be allocated, the average of those 5 hours. For ERCOT, which is Texas, it's 4. New England and New York and MISO, which is a Mid-Atlantic state, is Chicago area, it's 1 hour. Your entire demand charge for this year was based upon what you did during a single hour last year. Now, the thing that makes it so bizarre is that nobody knows what that hour or those 5 hours are until the end of the year. So it's a look back. So they look back and say, what hour or what 5 hours was the grid under the most stress, meaning the highest peak load, all of those things, and then how much did you contribute to that? That's going to determine how much you pay.
David, we have a question that's been asked. It was, how complicated is it to find out your company's information like PLCs from the grid operator?
It's quite easy because literally you can just ask them, and in many cases it's actually on the bill. Finding it out is not the challenge, because at that point you're already, excuse the technical term, you're already screwed because it happened last year. You're going to pay for it regardless this year from what you did last year. Well, the key question to ask then is, how do I know when these things are going to happen? How do I predict when that peak hour is going to be so I can turn on my backup generator? So if you're doing it yourself, the thing you need to do is you need to be monitoring the grid. Literally, you become a member of the ISO here, and you literally monitor what the grid load is, what the prices are, and things like that. To help you, there are firms out there that literally will send you alerts. You subscribe to them, and they will give you sort of a warning. They'll say, we believe this afternoon is going to be the peak load contribution hour, between 2 and 5 or something like that. So you can subscribe to an alert. If you're an Exergy customer, we take care of all this stuff for you, and we monitor it continuously. But the implications of this are actually unbelievable. Let's take a look at an electric bill. So here's an electric bill. This is a real bill, actually, just a photocopy from someone. Here is the demand charge. It is 60% of the bill. 60%. Now, we were talked about index pricing, right? We said, look, we could reduce the cost of the energy you're buying by buying it wholesale, right? And we get like 20% there. Look at this, 60% is demand charges. It's unbelievable, absolutely fascinating. Now, that is for PLC, peak load contribution. That's done by the transmission operation group. So the RTO, regional transmission operator, or ISO, independent system operator. That's how they charge you. But your local utility, the one who essentially brings you the electricity on that last mile or last 2 miles, they got poles, they got transformers, they got all that stuff too. They got to charge you. Now they play this in a little bit or a lot different game. So rather than having just a couple of hours of the previous year, it's done by month for the previous month. And it's not the peak load of the grid during the month, it's how much load you had at any point in time, at any point in the 24 hours for those 30 days. They're going to find the highest peak load that you had, and that's what's going to determine how much you pay for that month's electricity. So here is where it becomes incumbent on you to really understand your operations. And that means, how does your load really change throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month? So let's say you've got a process that runs only a couple of hours per week. Those few hours will determine the demand charge from the local utility for every hour of that month. So again, if you've got a process that only runs a couple of times, maybe it's every day, but it only runs 2 hours a day or something, that's when you consider peak shaving, basically turning on the backup generator, knocking down those peaks. Now, if your load is flat 24/7, 365 days a year, there's nothing you can do. But most people aren't like that. Most people have, deliveries come in. I get in a 10,000 gallon tanker truck, there's multiples, they all come in at the same time, and I got to pump them out and my load goes up. Well, that would be the time in order to run your backup generator and allow you to shave that peak. I got to tell a story, two of them actually. We had a customer that had $250,000 demand charge per year, $250,000. It was a fairly big facility, but it's like nobody could figure out where this was coming from. We total up everything and there's just not that much load. What we found, and again, this is what Exergy does for you, monitor your load all the time, 24/7, every minute, blah, 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 blah. We have machine learning that, figures stuff out, is that on the last Tuesday of every month at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, when the grid's usually under stress, their control system turned on for test purposes all of their backup systems. Now, I said there were fire pumps, there were evacuation pumps, there's a whole variety of things. All of them turned on instantaneously, exactly at the same time for 10 minutes. And if you looked at their load was kind of flat, and then you would have this 10-minute spike that was like 4 or 5 times. So it was easy. You just schedule things differently. Like, don't do that. You know, turn on one pump and turn on the next pump and things like that. I had another customer that was doing the same thing, but with their air conditioning system, right? So it was a hot night, but it was a commercial building. So the air conditioning is turned off or turned, you know, way down. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning, before people come into the office, they turned on every compressor all at the same time. And there was this huge spike. Now, on a yearly basis, doesn't matter. But on a 15-minute basis, it does. So peak shaving becomes important if your load has that kind of variability. Okay, the next way and the last way of making money is demand response. Now, federal regulations, that's FERC, consider the reduction of load to be synonymous with generation. Meaning, like, if you went to the grid and said, I'm going to sell you, you know, I got this generator, I'm going to sell you a bunch of kilowatt hours, they would buy it. If you go to them and say, hey, I'm willing to take a bunch of kilowatt hours off of the grid, they will pay you the same amount to go away. So they will pay the same wholesale rate to you for the amount of load that you take off. Now, power through the grid causes serious issues. And the grid often prefers to pay you to reduce your load than they want to put more generation on the grid. If I go back to my toll analogy, think of this as a paid detour. Please go this way, don't go on the toll road, right? So for example, on a very, very hot day, the wires stretch and then people, you know, turn on their air conditioners, they pull more power through the lines stretch even more, they start drooping, they droop, they hit a tree, and boom, we got a fire, we got a blackout. This is what happened in Northern California. So demand response is a way in which you are using your backup generator, not only to make money because they're paying you, but also to help all of your neighbors and everybody else by reducing the stress on the grid and helping the reliability of the grid. Now, playing the demand response game, again, you got to be a member of the grid, you got to watch pricing and everything else. There's 2 ways that it's done. By far, most of it is done during what's called the day-ahead market. And the day-ahead market is where you bid in your energy, or in this case, your demand response load, with a price. So if I was a generator, I'd say, hey, I am willing to sell you power tomorrow at these hours for 3 cents a kilowatt hour. The same way as I would bid in and say, hey, I'm willing to take my load off the grid for 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So you bid it into the day ahead. Your bid of the demand response is considered a generator, basically. So when they run their optimization model, which is called the merit order dispatch model, they're going to consider you in that overall pricing. And the optimization is, what is the lowest cost way of serving the load? And if the best way is for you not to put the load on the grid, they're going to pay you. About 98% of demand response really gets kind of done in the day ahead market. Now the real-time market, because the day ahead market is forecasting the real-time market, and it's pretty bloody accurate. It's within about 5% or so, but stuff happens. So in the real-time market, which is like right now, you know, the weather could be different than forecasted, or a generator could go down, or somebody, you know, some truck hit a pole or something like that, and prices could change. And the prices could spike up. You would like to take advantage of that. So again, you monitor the grid. If the grid pricing is going above what you want to get paid, you ask for a dispatch. So if we go back and look at our pricing out there, the game you play, and I hate to use that term game, is when the price is going to be high, you ask for demand response. Not only are you shielding yourself from the high price, remember index pricing, but you're actually getting paid by the grid. So in essence, you're making a profit because the price that they're willing to pay you is likely to be higher than your self-generation cost. So not only do you avoid paying anything, you're making a profit on what they pay you. Those are the 4 things you got to know to make money. But to make money, you got to have the right assets. So the right asset is, what kind of generator is this? So John Rodriguez, head of gas generators for Cummins, please come on board and help me here. Are you there, John?
Yeah. Hey, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Yourself?
Great, great.
Now, I made a couple of statements here, and John, I may read them off, but I'd like you to comment here. When I say what kind of generator, I say it's got to be natural gas. And my recollection on that is that diesel generators can't participate in these kinds of programs. Is that right, John?
I guess depending on the exact location, it could potentially be inaccurate. Diesels can operate in revenue generating applications just like natural gas, but they have to have special emission requirements and permitting.
Oh, that's right. And it gets very expensive too, because diesel's a lot more expensive than natural gas, and then you have to have all the emission requirements. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, so technically it's feasible, but it's much more common nowadays for the natural gas fueled gensets to be the asset of choice for these applications.
Now, our customers, which we refer to as the always on, right? These are our customers are people that need to keep running if the grid goes down. And it's not like it can go down for an hour or two. And we think about, again, up in Northern California, you might be down for a week or more. So we need reliable prime power that can operate 24/7, 365 days a year. So this is, John, this is kind of serious, but super good equipment, right?
Yeah, this is the correct selection. So basically, you know, not only do you have an asset that can continue to operate basically, you know, until needed and just continuously, but you have a fuel source in your pipeline that does not need to be refilled, does not have to have dispatch capabilities like diesel fuel, you know, assets would, and this can do exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there are countries that their entire grid runs on these things. So it's, we're talking about high quality, again, 24/7, 365. Now, a key aspect here is grid paralleling capability. And that's kind of unique in the sense of we are demand responding, we're peak shaving. We are not taking the load off the grid, all of it. We're staying synchronized to the grid. So if the load was like 1 megawatt, we may take 900 kilowatts off the grid and leave 100 kilowatts on, always staying synchronized to the grid. John, that is a sort of a different sort of technology, right?
Correct. So, I mean, the traditional generators that, like you said early on in the call, that people are used to are the home standbys or the very small ones that do an open transition type transfer switch where you are either connected to your grid or the generator, but never really both. And grid paralleling capability allows you to stay in parallel, operate that genset. And what that does is it provides the grid as a infinite buffer. So if you have any sort of load changes at your facility, the grid is going to help absorb those load changes. You're going to have a completely consistent frequency, voltage dip, and things will be basically non-existent because the grid is there holding everything together. But you still get the added benefit of reducing your load tremendously, your peak demand tremendously, using the generator to produce those kilowatts in that power, and use the grid as a you know, valuable tool, but paying very little for it during those times.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. And the last real aspect here is we're looking for a generator that can handle your full load, not just some, you know, standby critical systems, et cetera, for two reasons. One, our customers, and we think you, want to run your business, not just some refrigerators and lights if the grid is down. You want to be open for business, producing products, doing stuff. And that means you need a generator for the full load. Number two is you want to save as much money as you can, and that means you want to be able to take as much of the load off the grid during that PLC as possible. So this isn't, you know, like, let's go find the smallest generator that we can use. It's called, let's find the best generator that's going to keep us running at 100% capacity and production. Thanks so much, John. Appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, so how to make money, what the type of generator, now how you gonna pay for it? Okay, now again, I wanted to reiterate, free means no money out of pocket, and the savings and additional revenue more than pay for the financing of the generator. And I want to thank Tom Waters for joining us from Hitachi Capital Corp. Tom, I'm going to make some statements. I hope you're going to back me up here. So help me out a bit here. So the first one is quality backup generators have a long history of reliability and holding their value. Also, let's think of it from the standpoint of companies that invest in a backup generator are serious, right? They've taken serious action to sustain their business in light of unknowns and things like that. So, Tom, how long has Hitachi been financing backup generators?
Yeah, so David, thanks for the invite. So Hitachi's been has a dedicated clean technology business that's been providing financing for a variety of energy efficiency initiatives for the last 7 to 10 years. And we're seeing more and more of the energy saving strategy that you have outlined in the previous slides regarding companies purchasing one or multiple generators to provide those energy savings. These generators are very good assets to finance. They have long-term useful lives, assuming that they are maintained and operated correctly.
Fantastic. Now, I've got some terms here. Are these reasonably accurate, or what can I expect?
Yeah, that's a good overview of sort of an average kind of deal. You know, the savings that are being generated through the various components that you identified, that's really going to drive the term of the financing. If your electricity expense is very high, and by use of a natural generator, you can save a lot of dollars, you may not necessarily have to go to 10 years. You may want to finance it for a shorter period of time, but certainly the average useful life of these assets support a 10-year term.
5% rate looks pretty good. What does it take for me to get that? And what was our customers, what do they have to supply you?
Yeah, so the customer has to supply us with financials. So the rate is driven primarily by two factors. One is the credit capacity, the credit strength of the customer. And then the second factor that we look at is the term. So those two factors, credit quality and term, drive the rate. And in terms of, again, what we need is, you know, we're looking for preferably audited financial statements for the last 3 years. Also any interim financials. And then now, which is something new as a result of the COVID-19, we're actually asking our customers what the impact of COVID-19 is on their business. Some businesses have a greater impact than others, but that kind of COVID-19 statement is part of our overall credit evaluation.
Yeah, we can't get away from the virus, can we, Tom? Thank you. Okay, so what does it translate into in dollars? So you heard me mention ERCOT. So this is a project down in ERCOT, which is Texas. And as I said, there was 4 areas where they're saving money. Now, the distribution of savings depends a bit on what RTO or ISO you're in. So this is unique to ERCOT here. But if we just look at this, $78,000 or almost 18% saving off their bill just by changing or reducing that peak load contribution. 18% just by running a couple of hours, as long as you know the right hours to run, obviously, which is important. The energy savings from self-generation, this is that going on the index, right? So we're going to buy low and then, you know, on the wholesale, and then when the price pops up, we're going to self-generate. So we're going to save money from having, save money by self-generating versus buying it from the grid. Down here, the demand charge from peak shaving is very small for this customer. And again, the reason is this customer's load is really, really pretty flat. So there's, the only way to peak shave it is like run 24/7, 365 days a year. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One of the things I didn't mention, though, is this other $15,000 or 3.4%. is other savings due to not buying as much from the grid. So you've got taxes. So you don't pay, you're paid taxes on the energy you buy, not on energy that you generate. There's other riders and other initiatives that the utility and the state may have that they essentially put on your bill depending upon how much energy you consume. So just by taking those 4 items that we've learned about today already could have cut your bill by 47%, 47%. But of course you have to have a backup generator, and how much does that cost? So for this particular customer, that cost about $161,000 per year. That's essentially, call it the lease payment, right? The lease payment. So net, you're saving about 11% of your bill, getting a backup generator. And I do have to remind you, we didn't talk about the downtime costs. So if you were down, remember, you're a large manufacturer and you're down for 16 hours, that's $350,000. Let's say that happens 3 times in the year because of flooding or hurricane. We're in Texas here, right? That's $1 million. So $1 million additional savings because you're open and able to run. Now that's ERCOT. I'll give you one more other example. This is up in PJM territory. They were spending about $400,000 a year. They were not in a really good location for reliability. They're at the end of a distribution line. With a backup generator in there equal to 100% of their load, using it for PLC, putting them on the index, that wholesale pricing, doing peak shaving and doing demand response, we were able to save them about $34,000 a year, even after they're paying for the generator. And again, this doesn't take into account the savings from not going down. For this company, they would average about 6 to 7 times down per year, at least. Anytime they go down for more than 2 to 3 minutes, it's at least 8 hours because of, they had to clean up molds and all kinds of crazy stuff. Each hour down was $20,000. So, they're down for 8 hours, 20,000, that's 160, 5 times of that, that's $900,000. So phenomenal return on investment. So wrapping up here, how to get a free backup generator. First, you got to get the right one. And the right one is a natural gas paralleling generator that is equal to your load. So you can keep running when the grid goes down, and that gives you the greatest flexibility for things like demand response and PLC management. Then you need the 4 things on how you make money, and that is purchase wholesale and protect yourself by self-generation from the swings in the price, reduce your peak load contribution and dramatically cut your demand charges, peak shave when appropriate or when you can do it. And again, that depends upon what your load looks like, and then demand respond. And demand respond is essentially being a good neighbor. The grid wants you to do this. As more renewables come into the grid, the volatility of the grid, the stress on the grid goes up. The grid is asking you, by essentially incentivizing you by paying you to take your load off, help the grid and make some money. And then lastly, and again, thanks to Hitachi, attractive 100% low rate financing. So you can make money, enjoy resiliency, and I'll say sleep better at night. I do want to thank all of our co-sponsors. Are there any other questions out there, Dave?
Yeah, there were 2 questions asked. I'll ask them together since I think one of them will be easy. The first question was, how can we obtain a copy of the slides of the presentation? And the other is, if you don't want to do it yourself, it would be great to understand how to work with Exergy Energy to facilitate this.
Okay, the first one is you signed up for this webinar. Therefore, we've got your contact information, everything else. We will send you automatically a copy of this presentation, as well as a link to the recording in case you want to sit around with the family later and have a glass of wine and watch it again. The last question is, look, is this complicated? It's really not that complicated, but it isn't really easy. And the reason is because you've got to be completely linked into what's going on to the grid. You got to be managing, you got to be monitoring the load on the grid, the prices of the grid. You have to have a system in order to respond back to the grid and say, hey, I want to demand respond and things like that. Can you do it? Sure. Are you in the business of doing it? Look, this is a DIY, do-it-yourself webinar. If you don't want to do it yourself, let us do it. And I'm going to be really, really honest and candid with you here. We probably will save you more money than you trying to do it yourself, because we've got it all already built. It's all automated. So you basically just subscribe to our service. It's essentially you just agree and you buy your energy from us. We manage the backup generator. We handle the support, the maintenance, the service of the generator. We make sure it's running properly all the time. And then we handle all of the other things, the peak load contribution, your peak shaving, and you don't even know we're there. You enjoy 100% reliability, lower prices, and you have nothing to worry about. And if you don't have a backup generator interested, obviously we've got Hitachi as a partner. We can also supply that at no cost to you. You would just have a longer term agreement with us for buying your energy. I want to thank everybody. I went a little over. I do apologize for that. I do want to again thank John Rodriguez from Cummings. Thank you so much. And Tom Waters from Hitachi Capital. This is the second of our webinar series. Next week is on batteries. So backup versus batteries. What is the right decision for you? Hope to see you there, and thank you so much for attending.